Hello, today we will be discussing how to migrate your SQL Server from on-premise to an Azure SQL Managed Instance. Now the same thing applies to Azure SQL on an Azure VM or the fully managed Azure database. So it's all the same process. However, for this demo, we're going to go with the Azure SQL Managed Instance. This will be a live migration with minimal downtime. So the idea is with this topology, we have the SQL databases on premise, and what we're going to be using is a software called Azure Data Studio. The Azure Data Studio is going to help us by running an assessment on our databases, see if there are any databases that cannot be migrated for any errors. If there are errors, it'll tell us what kind of errors there are, and recommendations for fixing them. Also, it will recommend the Sku in Azure specifications for the machine that we're going to be provisioning. So it's very helpful. Once we run the assessment, we're going to provision the SQL Managed Instance and then run a full backup from our SQL database to an Azure Storage, which we will be creating as well. Once we do that, we're going to do a restore of our databases to our SQL Managed Instance. And then we're going to continue backing up transaction logs, restoring them as we continue until the date where we want to do the cutover. We will use the Azure Data Migration Service and basically stop the connectivity to the SQL Server on-premise, flip the switch, and make this the primary and cutover. So let's get to it and see how it's done in Azure. So here's my machine that has the SQL Server, and the first thing I want to do is download Azure Data Studio. So I'll go to Google and search for Azure Data Studio download and hit enter. So I get the link here. I'll download it for Windows because that's what I have. Run the installation with the default. Here's my SQL Server Managed Studio, and here's my database. I am going to copy my server name so I can connect to it later on from Azure Data Studio. Okay, so it's done. Let's launch it. So the next thing is we need to do is to install an extension that would help us in the migration. So we go to the extensions here. We simply type in the word migrate, and it's called Azure SQL Migration, and we basically install it. It'll take a few seconds. It's ready and it's installed. The next thing to do is to create a connection to our on-premise database. So, new connection. And I will go to my server and use Windows authentication and connect. I'm just going to enable the trust between the server. So here I have 3 databases, as you can see, that I'm planning to migrate. So if I go here to Azure SQL Migration and I say New Migration, this is the extension we just installed. So I don't have any previously saved sessions, so I'm going to start a new session and hit Next. So it automatically detected all my 3 databases, as you can see, and it's asking me select the databases that you want to access. So I'm going to go ahead and access all 3 of them and click next. So as you can see, you can go with an Azure Managed Instance, an Azure Virtual Machine, a SQL Server, an Azure Virtual Machine, or this feature is still in preview, but it works. It's the Azure SQL Database, which is the fully managed database. For this demo, we're going to go with the Azure SQL Managed Instance. So I'm going to select this one, and then I'm going to check all 3 databases that I have, select them, make sure they're checked, and then click on Get Azure Recommendation. Now it's going to ask me, where do you want us to save the recommendations? I'm going to browse and select a folder. Select a folder of your choice. I'm going to select the temp folder, in my case here. And it's going to start collecting usage and so it can recommend the Sku for you and the databases. Now, one thing to know, this is going to take about 10 minutes, as you can see, for the initial thing. In production, you would want to run this for a few days, especially when you have heavy loads on the databases. This would read the actual usage and give you a better recommendation. So I'd run it, 3-4 days, and then come back and refresh the recommendations to see what's being recommended. So I'm gonna wait and pause the video and come back when it's done so we can see the results. All right, so it took about 10 minutes for the assessment to finish. And as you can see, it's telling me I have 3 databases that can be migrated without any issues. And that's the Sku that it's picking for me. If I want to know why did it choose this, I can go to View Details. And it'll have full description of why actually it's choosing this for me. Also, if let's say I have 2 databases that can be migrated and one that can't, I can click on this. It'll give me description. As you can see, I don't have any errors right now, so it says no issues. But there are issues. It would basically tell you here, this is why we can't migrate this database and such. So at this point, I am going to click Save and Close. I'm going to save this assessment. Of course, if you're doing it in production, you need to run it for a few days. Let's say you ran it for a day or 2, and then you want to see if this changes. You can refresh recommendations. It'll refresh it and tell you if it recommends a different Sku at this point or not. But in this demo, I'm just going to go with this. So I'm going to click Save and Close. But I'm going to keep the VM in the Azure Data Studio running. And going back to our topology, now we ran the assessment on the on-premise SQL Server, and we installed the Azure Data Studio. The next thing is to provision an Azure Storage and start backing up our databases to it. So here we are at the Azure portal, and we're going to go ahead and create a storage account. So we click on Create a Resource, search for storage, and let's create one. Now here's your Azure subscription. If you don't have a subscription, you'll need one. You will need the resource group. I already have one, but if you don't have one ready for this, you can click on Create New, type it, and it'll create it for you. Now we need to name the storage account, so I'm going to just call it SQL Lab or SQL Migration Test. It's already taken. Okay. 11. All right, SQL Migration 11. Pick your region. There's no need to go fancy on the specifications of the storage account unless you're going to be using it for other things. For this, I'm just going to go with standard because we're only using it temporarily to back up and restore the databases and then I'm gonna delete it. And if you're not using it for any other things that you have, basically use the same. Just gonna leave the default for everything. Review and create. Now we want to create containers and basically back up our uh, databases to an Azure Blob Storage. So let's see how can we do that. So this is the Azure Data Store that we created in the previous part, and we go to containers here, and we want to create 3 containers, a container for each database basically. So I'm going to call the first one DB01, create a second one, and I call it DB02. You can call them whatever you want, but I'm just going to name them with the database's names. It makes it easier. And I'm going to call DB03. The next thing we want to create, we want to create shared access tokens so we can access those and give our SQL access to it, so we can back up the databases here. So I'm going to access the container, go to shared access token, and just add permissions. All the permissions, it doesn't matter because we're only doing it temporary. I'm going to choose the date. I'm allowing this access. You can add your external IP address here to restrict access only from your IP. In production, I would do that. Here, I'm not going to really do it. It doesn't matter because I'm just doing it temporary. But in production, you would want to add and restrict the access to a certain IP. So I'm going to just hit generate SAS token. And I'm gonna copy this blob SAS token to probably a notepad. So I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna say this is for DB01. Now I'm gonna do the same thing for DB02 and DB03. So once you copy this, you can X out, go to DB2, shared access token, give the permissions, choose the date, put your IP address here and generate. Copy. And this is for DB2. Oops. I guess I copied the wrong one maybe. Let's copy the correct one. Looked like it's longer somehow. DB02. That's very weird, but usually they're the same length. We'll try it out, I guess, and see. And then we'll go and do the same thing for DB03. All right, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna recreate DB01. Something is not right. It's shorter. It shouldn't be. So I'm just gonna exit out. Go to DB1 and create a new one. Huh? So now that we have the shared access tokens, we'll go ahead to our SQL Server, start a new query, and go from there. So here's my SQL Server, my SQL Management Studio. You can create the credentials from here by right-clicking and saying, and click on New Credential, or you can follow the script. So I'm going to copy my tokens here for each database, for each container, I mean. You can take a screenshot of this screen and just, type it as is. This would be the URL. As you can see, this is the URL which we can get from here. If you want to get the URL, you simply go to Properties. So for DB01, this is the URL. For DP02, it's the same thing. So this is my DB01, and this is the key. And I'm going to go ahead and create 3 keys, 3 credentials. So now if we refresh here, we will see 3 credentials, 1 to DB01, DB02, and DB03, and this is an old one that I don't really need, so I'm going to delete it. All right, now it's time to back up our databases. So here's my script. One thing to mention is your databases recovery mode should be on full. So if that's not in full, it's not going to work. If you go to options, make sure this is not on simple or backlogged, it's on full mode. Also, just because I have a SQL Express, I'm not using compression, but if you're migrating from a SQL full version, not an Express, you can add the word compression here, and that's going to save you a lot. But with the Express, that doesn't work, so I'm just going to remove the compress. So I'm going to go ahead and what I'm saving is I'm saving each database to the container that belongs to it, and then I'm naming it the name of the database. So I'm going to just run this query. And my databases are small, so it doesn't take time. So going back to DB01 now, as you can see, I have the database already backed up here. If I go to the containers, here's DB2, and here's the database, and DB03, and here's the database. And going back to our topology, so now we ran this part, we created an Azure Data Store, and we backed up our databases here. Now it's time to create an Azure SQL Managed Instance, or if you're working on an Azure SQL VM or an Azure Database, it's time to create it. So let's get to it. So here we are at the Azure portal. We're gonna click on Create a Resource, and we're gonna look for Azure SQL Managed, and it pops up, Managed Instance, and we're gonna say Create. Now remember, based on the recommendations from Azure, from the Azure Data Studio, we want to go with the lowest, Gen 5, 2 cores, the one they recommended. You would go and find your recommendations and follow it accordingly. So your subscription, again, I'm gonna pick my resource group. Now the managed instance is not really supported in a lot of regions. One region you'd have to go and search which ones is it supported in. I know South Central US is supported in there. So I'm going to pick it, and the managed instance name, I'm going to call it SQL Main Lab. SQL Main Lab. Okay, now this makes a big difference on what you choose. As you can see, I'm going to choose 4 cores because that's the recommendation for me. The storage, I'm just going to go with the minimum because it's very expensive, as you can see. So this is general purpose. This is the lowest we can go with. So I actually went and changed the region to East US, which is supported, and it's also a little cheaper in the East US. So I'm going to go with the lowest based on the recommendations. And as you can see, the cost per month is $736. And that's basically, that includes the license. If you do have the license, if you own your own license, and you go to the Azure Hybrid, as you can see, the price goes down a lot. But I do not, so I'm going to stay with it. For this demo, I'm going to go with locally redundant storage because I do not need to geo-replicate it or nothing. So this is the lowest and the cheapest machine I can get. I'll just say apply. For authentication, if you already have an Azure Active Directory tenant, you can use your Active Directory. I do not. So I'm just going to use SQL authentication, and I'm going to create a username and a password. All right, then we're going to click next. So talking about virtual networks, if you need some help with virtual networks and subnets, please watch my other video that talks about it. Otherwise, here, you can simply have it create a new virtual network. In production, usually, if you have resources and infrastructure in Azure, you already have a VNet. Just like me, for example, I already have a VNet and I have subnets, so it's telling me I can place this managed instance and this VNet under the subnet. So I'm going to go ahead and have it place it here in one of those. So it's telling me that it's going to configure this subnet automatically for managed instance network security groups and such. So, you would place the managed instance in a separate subnet by itself. You don't want to create any other resources in that subnet. So it's fine. So we're just going to go with the default here and see the security. And again, just go with the default. You can go with failover secondary for this. In the maintenance window, you can specify when is the maintenance window. I'm just going to go with the default. Review. All right, so this is going to take, as you can see, up to 6 hours to complete. I'm going to pause this video, and we'll come back when it's done. So now, based on our topology, we completed 1, 2, and 3 now being provisioned. It's going to take up to 6 hours. So the last part is to actually restore the databases and the transaction logs and continuously continue to restore until we do the cutover. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we have our databases. Let's log into Azure Data Studio. So we would go to the connections. This is the database that we connected to, and now we want to link our Azure account where we provisioned the managed instance, so we can log into the server as well here. And you can click on this. It'll pop up asking you to put in your username and password for Azure login, and I already did that. So now I'm gonna get the URL for the database so I can log into it. So here I am. This is the SQL Managed Instance, and what we want to do is copy this URL here so we can log in with it. I'm going to go back to my Azure Data Studio. Well, apparently I have 2 of them open, so I'm just going to close one. And I'm going to start a new connection here. And simply paste this URL here. And then when I provision the managed instance, if you remember, I only created SQL login because I don't have Azure integration with this. Then the credentials. And connect. And as you can see, our instance, our managed instance is ready. We do not have any databases yet. We have 3 of them on premise, and we do not have anything here. So we want to go back to our assessment that we started in part 1 and continue from there. So the way we do that is we simply click on our server and say manage, and that'll open our extension again where we were. So this is where we were. So as you can see, it's saying start a new session or resume previously session. I'm going to resume because we already started it. I'm going to fill up all my information here. This is the subscription. This is the location where your instance is. This is the resource group. This is the database instance name. And this is the login info. I'm going to hit connect. So as you can see, it's showing me 3 databases, the ones we want to migrate. So when I click next, as you can see, we have online migration and offline migration. I am going to go with online migration because this is the minimal downtime, and that's what most companies would rather go with. The offline migration is just like offline backup and restore. This is the storage account, and this is the container. So this is DB2, and this is DB3. So it's all in the same storage account, different containers, and that's where I'm going to save each database. That's where we saved each backup so it can restore from it. So I'm going to click next. And this is the summary. Basically, it's telling me what I did, and I'm going to click on Start Migration. It's starting the migration, as you can see. And if I click here, it's saying it's restoring. Now, one thing, you can also go online to your migration service that we just created and check it out from there. So if I go to Home and I say All Resources, and it's a migration service, so it's called Azure Database Migration Service. So this is the one. Loading right now. So you have these options. If you click on Monitor Migration, as you can see, we have 3 databases that are being migrated right now. If you click on this one, it'll give you status, the target, and still nothing, still restoring. So we're gonna have to wait. I'm gonna have to pause. It depends on how large your database is. This is gonna take some time, but in my case, it's not. I'm just gonna pause and come back when at least the first backup is restored. So that took about 5 or 7 minutes, or probably less. It's really not a lot. 1.6 minutes. Oh wow. So if I click on this database now here, as you can see, it says last applied is db01.bak, which BAK, and it says it's ready for cutover. It's going to be the same thing for both, for DB02 and DB01. So at this point, also if we looked here, if we refreshed here, as you can see, it says it's ready for cutover. But we're not ready for cutover yet. Now at this point, what we want to do is go back to our SQL database and create transaction logs until we're ready for cutover. So usually people would create a job that would run transaction logs, would run this script, for example, every 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It depends how large your transaction logs. So when you do a cutover, you would have minimal downtime. So here I'm doing backup logs, and I'm doing it to the same path, and I'm using the same keys that I already have. So make sure you change the name because it's not going to overwrite it in there. So I'm calling it db02 log.bak. So I'm going to run this. And now if we go back to our storage, containers, we looked at DB01. As you can see, there's a log now. Now, if you run the second log, you can name this log DB1 DB01 log 1, for example. It would have a third file. Now, if we go and check here, if we open DB03, it says all backup restored. It's going to take some time for the log to actually restore, so we're going to have to wait a little to do this. Also, sometimes it's easier to check online. I'm going to pause until the logs actually restore. So now if we go and check, it's going to take some time. You just have to have patience. So as you can see, the last applied backup is the log. And online, it's going to say the same thing. If we clicked on DB2, for example, as you can see, the log was the last one. So at this point, we're ready. What we want to do is stop any connections to this database, the on-premise. If we have an app or a website pointing to here, this is the downtime right now. So we're going to stop connectivity to here, run our last transaction log, wait until it restores. Again, we would be in production running this like on a job. So when we come to cutover time, it would be a very small, and it would be a small transaction log for each database, and it's not going to take a long time to do. So at this point, after I ran, I'm not going to run it again because it's going to take time, but you get the idea. So now I'm ready for the cutover. So I go to my databases here, one by one, and I say, complete cutover. So this is DB01. I'm going to say complete cutover. So it's telling me that completing cutover without restoring all backups may result in data loss. We already stopped the connectivity to the on-premise database. And yes, we ran the last transaction log, so we want to go ahead and confirm and complete cutover. So we did this for the first one, as you can see. We want to go back to here, to DB2, and complete cutover. Do the same thing. And we'll do and we will do DB03. And now we just have to wait until the cutover is complete. If we check online as well, as you can see, it's saying it's completing. We're gonna have to wait. My last transaction logs are not large, so it's not gonna take time. I'm just gonna pause the video and wait until it completes. Okay, so as you can see, the migration status succeeded for all three of them. It completed. If I go back to my instance here, my Azure instance, and I go to my databases, and I refresh, and here are my three databases. As you can see, tables, if I go open the main database, that's it. So at this point, you would just make sure all your databases are correct. Your app is connecting correctly to the database, and in Azure, and it's working fine, and the migration has completed. If you have any questions, you can leave me comments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.